So, what is this time? Why are we here in my office talking into a bunch of microphones? Um, we thought, friends, that it would be nice in this Lenten season to just take a brief moment to say a bit more about our Lenten soup supper talks, which are about death and dying, and maybe our hope is from this conversation, we might be able to do something more widely when it comes to podcasting, and to give people a chance from our church to sit down and to talk through and to do some visiting together. And really, it achieves our goal of wanting to know one another more. We can't really love like Jesus if we don't really know each other. And so part of what we hope with anytime we sit down is for you to get to know our opinions about things more, or perhaps each other more. So we thought we'd start with just a little brief kind of synopsis of what we've talked about in the Lenten soup supper so far, and then maybe what stood out, and give some further thoughts on it. So,
Yeah.
fair?
Fair.
All
And
right.
thanks for joining us at the start of our podcast careers. This is just the beginning, and
Oh,
you guys were
yes.
here day one.
Yep.
And I'm glad you're feeling better, Father
Thank
Allen.
you.
Yeah.
Yes, not out of the woodwork entirely, but
Yeah.
yes, good enough to talk, and happy to be talking to you. That's for sure.
So we are recording this on Wednesday, right before our third Lenten Soup Supper class. So I'll give you just a brief overview of what we've covered so far and kind of where we're headed. So our Lenten class this year is on the topic of death and dying, which is not the most exciting topic, but
Say the least.
but a important topic to talk about.
Indeed.
And like we said in the class, this was something that we have been thinking about. I think it was you, Father Allen, that came up with the idea initially. Not this Lent, but before last Lent in 2024. And so we've been praying about it and thinking through it. And it's a especially appropriate topic, I think, for our church now with all of the recent deaths that we've had in our community.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and like we've talked about in class, it's our feelings about death and grief, even in the loss that we've experienced, may feel raw right now. But I do think that this is all the more reason to dive in and to really explore what God is doing about this and what we can learn through the scriptures about this topic. So that's a broad overview. First class, we talked about sin and death and Jesus and what Jesus has done and is doing about both of those. And second class, Father Allen led. You talked about what happens after we die.
Yeah. I know. Nice, easy, weighty topic.
Right. When we were initially going through the topics of who's going to do what, I said, I don't want to do that one.
No, but it was actually really amazing what a robust discussion there was around it. And I was afraid people would just sort of all be quiet and just let me talk and not really say anything. But no, really, from moment one, someone chimed in with something, and the conversation then flowed from there. So I got to admit, I've been amazed the amount of not just conversation in the class, but from what I hear, the further amount of conversation people in our church are having about this topic, which is good. I mean, grim though it is to speak about death, important it is if we're to know what and how that impacts our faith and what it is we say we believe about death, life after death, and all that such. So, yeah,
it's been good. I think it's been doing good work in our church, as you're saying, and in our hearts. And I've been encouraged, as you just mentioned, of folks really engaging in the class in particular, and bringing your questions and concerns. So if you are one of those folks, thank you.
Indeed.
For bringing all your questions, and keep hitting Father Allen with those hard ones. So I love that. Tonight, we will be talking about how do we talk to people about death and dying? So how do we have those hard conversations of, somebody is suffering, and the kind of best practices of things that are helpful to say and things that are not helpful to say, that we're all guilty of doing at some point. And we'll talk a little bit about suffering through the lens of the book of Job. So that'll be a snapshot of that today as well. So,
have you ever had to have a conversation with someone about death?
I have.
Okay. How did it go?
They're hard.
Well, indeed. Yes. Understandably.
And I think it kind of depends upon the, so I've talked to people who are terminally ill and know that they're dying, and those conversations have a little bit of a different tone than yesterday I was talking to my mom, who is perfectly healthy,
Mhm.
but asking her like, "Hey, mom, have you talked or have you decided your own funeral plans?" And like, that's not a fun
Mm,
conversation to bring up with her,
sure.
but she was like, "No, we haven't actually. We need to start working on that." So,
Mm.
um, so it's awkward to say
Yeah.
the least. But I will say, with a individual in mind who was terminally ill,
Mm.
there was he kind of went through different stages, I guess.
Mhm.
And I was serving as a hospital chaplain at the time, and this is one of my patients and friends that I had walked through the whole summer with. And he, uh, the whole summer he knew that he was dying. He had heart failure, and he's a young guy too. And so I got to walk through those different stages of him being in denial of it, being like,
Mhm.
"No, I'm going to be all right. I'm
Yeah.
going to be healed." But really, medically, there was nothing more that they could do for him.
Mm.
Um, and then it was really amazing to see God working in his life, because he was a Christian and we prayed together often, um, to see how he came to a place of peace
Right.
and resolution of, this is happening,
Mhm.
and um, I won't suffer anymore. Um,
Yeah.
and it gave him an opportunity to say the things that he wanted to say to people before he passed away.
Mhm.
And so I think in his case, some of that was a gift, knowing that
Mhm.
that he was dying, and it gave him some time to, talk with his parents and siblings and things like that. So
Yeah.
hard, definitely hard, but
Sure.
I think fruitful, those
Right.
conversations. How about you? I'm sure you've had your fair share of experiences.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's hearing you speaking to someone who themselves is preparing to die. Often, I find a lot of my conversations are with the relatives of those
Yeah.
rather than necessarily the person dying themselves. Not that I wouldn't speak to them either, but yeah, some of the tougher conversations have been how to approach this person's loss. Whether it's a spouse, whether it's a sibling. Um, and talk about the same stages of denial, and
Yeah.
I don't know if I've come across acceptance right away.
Yeah.
Maybe I just haven't had enough experience in life yet, but often I find the family members or people who are left behind are far more anxious, understandably so, um, than maybe even the person who's deceased themselves. There's a little more quick jump to acceptance because you kinda have to,
Yeah.
in a way that, the family members it's just a different journey, and to I've learned somewhat how to just be silent in the room too,
Mm.
and to not say anything, just to be there.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the toughest things in pastoral ministry is knowing when to shut your mouth
Yeah.
and just not say anything and not obviously make it awkward if someone asks you a question. Of course you respond,
Just completely silent.
but not to try to fill that gap with platitudes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of again what we're addressing tonight is what not to say. Oh, it'll be okay. It won't.
Yeah.
And let's not try to sugarcoat that.
Mm.
Now that doesn't mean we don't have hope either.
Right.
But I think that willingness to lean into therefore what is it we really believe happens after this gives us a hope that maybe when our hope is lost in medical intervention or even miraculous healing,
Yeah.
what hope can we hold on to? That hope of the resurrection, that hope that we will be with Christ. And um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think it goes to our natural inclination to want to fix things.
Oh, indeed.
And even with our own uncomfort with their suffering, of
Mhm.
like, it's just going to be okay.
Yeah,
It's more of a reflection of us than it is on the situation, I think.
very right.
But I think what you're saying is that ministry of presence, just being
Absolutely.
there, just offering a listening ear,
Absolutely.
goes so far. And
Yeah.
not just something a priest can do, but
Oh,
anybody can do, right?
teed up very
Yeah.
well. Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I think what I have seen is that families and friends either draw closer in these moments
Mm.
or get more distant. That sounds like a very obvious point, but actually, in the best cases, it's drawn family closer together.
Mm.
And whether it's sons and parents or daughters and parents, whether it's siblings, actually, the reality of death upon the soon to be deceased, it just has a wonderful refining effect of what's most important and how do I want to spend this last time with you. Now, of course, that's not always the case in things like a car accident or something
Mhm.
more sudden. And that's kind of a different topic. I mean, how do you talk about death and dying when there's sort of tragedy or trauma involved? I mean, it seems like what we're
Yeah.
discussing is more you are diagnosed with an illness and you have some time
Right.
to put your affairs in order and to have those frank conversations, even if they don't always still happen. At least there is time to do so.
Mhm.
But yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, question for you, Father Allen,
Okay.
being our resident expert.
Yeah.
Where do you go in the scripture and in your own understanding of God and
Mhm,
God's nature when you encounter experiences of death in others, when you're counseling them or you're
mhm,
or talking
mhm.
with them? Where are your places of comfort that you are drawn to?
Places of comfort, I would say, as the counselor of someone through the process, that comfort for myself has to be, Lord, sustain me. I can't carry a weight. I think about that wonderful verse we often say at our Eucharistic services: "Come to me, all ye that are um, laden and, or excuse me, can't think with sick brain, burden heavy laden, and I will refresh you." And that
Yeah.
need that I'm not there to carry all that weight of grief.
Yeah.
And I don't think a layperson would either. We can't carry the weights God can. And so, if for personal um, strength through this, it's something like that. I think, though, to counsel the family, what I hope will give them comfort is maybe a few things. Often I'll turn to Revelation.
Hmm.
I think from what I gauge in sort of American culture, society, Western society, it's amazing how many people who are really not of a Christian practice will still believe in heaven. Or
Yeah.
have some belief in afterlife, and
Right.
you can find Pew Research and all the stuff that will
Mhm.
give those percentages if you're interested. Um, but I try to appeal to what is it really going to be like. It's not just a sometimes we can kind of jump to what we hope it will be like, but what does the Bible really describe it being like? And so,
Yeah.
of course, often that verse about there will be no more mourning or crying or death or pain, that's definitely a verse to do.
Yeah.
But just to point people to that picture of what the scriptures say. And this is the climax upon which it ends. So we're kind of left with that wonderful whew, which again doesn't take away the pain of the grief they're
No,
about to
not at all.
experience, but at least it helps us to put it in some sort of context.
Mhm.
Um, Interestingly, I don't often of late, I've been doing this more, but for historically, I've never turned to Jesus healing people from death, or not healing
Mm.
people from death, but, resurrecting them. So I think of
Right.
Lazarus, or I think of the widow's son, or, goodness, I'm thinking of one more, I can't.
Jairus's daughter.
Thank you, Jairus' daughter, that's the one.
Yep.
So it's there are definitely accounts of Jesus raising someone, um, and even though I think they do give comfort in some ways, I don't know if that helps a family member because it raises that natural question, well, why isn't God doing that for me?
Yeah.
That said, where I would be more inclined to point to it is in light of Jesus' resurrection. He is the first fruits, and clearly resurrection for us is possible,
Yep.
probable, definite.
Mhm.
It's not just, oh, he said we might be also included. No, he did raise people from the dead.
Yeah.
And that's in his earthly ministry. So it should naturally follow then
Yeah.
that if he was raised and promised that we would be raised, we will and we can be. Um, so that's probably places that come to mind where I would point people, but again, I think my temptation as a talker is to want to say more than I need to,
Mm.
and so, often I try to feel it out a little bit
Yeah.
to think what might be best. Um, I think one thing I have not done, and I'd say yet, because I'm still relatively young in ministry, is had what I would call a sort of deathbed confession.
Hmm. Yeah.
And where someone has truly could have been ready to just go, I need Jesus, and
Yeah.
sort of one of those situations. I'm sure people have had that, and maybe I need to feel a little conviction to be more bold in asking.
Mm.
I think sometimes even we can be a little afraid that's being too pushy,
Yeah.
but actually that want to make sure we're leaving this world well
Yeah.
should be something we're probably pretty bold to ask.
Yeah.
Would you like to make a confession? Would you like to really and truly receive God's grace?
Right.
Whether if you're ever uncertain or unsure, I wonder if that happens more in a chaplaincy role at a
Sure.
hospital. I mean, often when I'm with people at death, it's people from the church.
Right.
So it's probably safe to assume most of them have, at least in their own minds, put their trust in Christ. But But I imagine a hospital chaplaincy role, yeah,
Yeah.
there's probably a good number of people who do not,
Hmm.
and, or who have never made that profession of faith in any way, shape, or form,
Right.
and so, yeah. Did you find that was the case when you were doing your, CPE training, or
Yeah. So it's a delicate balance because we're
Indeed.
not, as hospital chaplains, of course, we come with our own personal beliefs and
Sure.
faith, and that's absolutely a part of everything we do unashamedly. But it's not necessarily a place to uh, evangelize as much. And so, I think, when we are trained, we could ask questions of, is there anything that you'd like to
Mhm.
do to be at peace
Right.
before you die? And kind of open the door for that. And some people
Mhm.
have said, I want to, confess some things
Yeah.
that happened in my life. And so,
Wow.
um, and incredibly special. I'm thinking of one person in particular, incredibly special moment of them confessing, and me getting to respond back with, we if God is faithful
Mhm.
and just and will forgive us our sins.
Yeah.
Um, and I completely trust that God has forgiven you of this now.
Mhm.
And how beautiful it is to hear, or for them to hear that.
Yeah.
They're carrying it their whole lives. And so, but yeah, I think there's definitely
Mhm.
space for that. I haven't had like a real deathbed confessional where someone is turning to Jesus last minute, but
Sure.
um, that'd be amazing to be a part
We were
of.
talking earlier
Yeah.
about what scriptures come to mind. I mean, the thief on the cross is a
Mm,
huge one, to give people hope that here is this man in his last breath almost, and he cries out to Jesus in faith.
yeah.
And if we take Matthew and Luke together, this was maybe not even the case 2 hours earlier. Seemed to give the impression they were both mocking him,
Yeah.
both on his right and his left. And yet, if Luke's account is taken chronologically with Matthew's, we
Yep.
can deduce that there was some change of heart
Yeah.
as he got closer and closer to death and saw, no doubt, the example of Jesus while those people were mocking him. Here he actually says, "Do you have no fear of God?" I mean, it's a very mature response. Like, whoa,
Yeah.
and then remember me and you when you enter in your kingdom.
Mm,
Today you will be with me in paradise. Wow,
yeah.
what a soothing thing that must have been.
Mm,
Balm to the soul, and
yes.
to truly die in peace. And I guess that's probably why our last session we want to focus on dying well.
Hmm.
That doesn't just mean do you have all your affairs in order and
Yeah.
have you gotten your little sort of executor sorted.
Hmm.
And I mean that's
Yeah.
important too. Don't get me
Yes.
wrong. And
Absolutely.
I will say that the most chaotic situations dealing with families and death has been when that's not happened. Especially there's multiple children and everybody wants to do what mom or dad wanted, and it's just it gets messy.
Yeah.
So maybe note if you've got siblings, definitely have a look at this now. I know you do.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
so so
Yeah.
yeah, have these conversations now. But how do you die well within your soul as well? How can you be at peace? And not to say you're not scared. I mean, none of us knows what death will feel like in a
Yeah.
sense.
Right.
And so I think that's natural to be fearful of what it will feel like. Will it
Mhm.
hurt? I mean, it's like a kid
Yeah.
getting a shot. Like you can't really describe it. Well, it'll be a quick pain. Like we
Yeah.
don't know. We really don't know. Um and so but I think we can enter into that pain no matter how severe or not with a sense of holy hope,
Hmm.
of what lies beyond this. And um yeah, it's
Yeah. And
mhm,
I think our the beauty of the church calendar helps to remind us of
mhm.
our own mortality and our own death with Ash Wednesday and even the
Oh yeah,
season
yeah,
of Lent.
yeah.
Um, that, as you're saying, dying well is not just on your deathbed, but it begins here
Mhm.
and now, um, in the life that
Yeah,
we're living. And are we loving the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength?
sure.
Something we just talked about in chapel. So yeah, I think the church calendar helps us to
Mhm.
be reminded of that,
Right.
in a way that the world around us does not.
Mhm.
And it's, in fact, death is very taboo to think about, talk about,
Right.
and avoided at all costs. And so
Yeah.
I'm grateful for our own calendar reminding us of that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, like I say, it's been great to see so many people discussing this and hearing of parishioners talking about it.
yeah,
And I guess truth be told, we put the invitation out yet again. If this has prompted in you either maybe a sense of concern about your own health, death, preparation for such, or that of a loved one, look, both of us are available to speak. It doesn't have to be me as the cleric only. I think just talking about it is healthy. And
Yeah.
so if you just connect with Steve and you're like, I just like the cut of his jib,
Thanks.
then that is perfectly fine. Talk it out and
Yeah.
have those conversations. I mean, that's really what I'm glad to see is happening, what we had hoped would happen.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the minute Lent's over. Oh, okay, now let's just
Mm.
switch that whole conversation off because it's awkward.
Yeah.
No, please do take that packet we handed out
Yes.
at the beginning. And there you go. Look at it right there. So even if you weren't that first session, please grab one from us. And like I say, we're happy to sit down with you about it. And yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we hope you guys will join us tonight for our
Indeed.
third Lent soup supper class.
That's right.
That'll be at 6 p.m. We'll have dinner, and
Mhm.
then we'll have a time of formation and fellowship, and then
That's right.
compline at the end. So hope to
great.
see you there.
All right. Looking forward to it.
All right.
All right, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.